My God, who would have thought that this video was gonna take off the way that it did? So recently, last week, I did a video on freight brokers going extinct and why I believe that that industry is slowly fading out and dying out. So in that video, I talked about the 4 reasons of why freight brokers are going extinct. So number 1 is the carriers are becoming smarter and smarter. They are sick and tired of a broker making 20-30% markup on their load. So if a carrier did, from point A to point B for $2,000, a lot of times the brokers mark up 20 or 30%, which is close to about $400 to $600 markup, which is their commission. The second thing is that the manufacturing plants themselves are becoming smarter and smarter, and they don't want to be paying $2,600 when the broker is paying the carrier $2,000, leaving them with $600 profit. So the manufacturing plants are also becoming smarter and smarter. The third thing that I talked about in that video is liability. So a manufacturing plant has a lot more liability when they're using a broker versus when they're using an asset-based carrier. And then the fourth thing was that the relationships are dying down. Actual human interactions, actual relationships between traffic managers and trucking companies are really dying down. So there is no more personal relationships. Everything gets populated in an RFP, and that RFP gets sent out to multiple carriers, and there's an RFP process. And a lot of the times, these manufacturing companies, they're using a third party that is independent, and they do their RFP process. So that human interaction, that traffic manager, the word fine and dine apparently does not exist because I used it multiple times in my last video. Fine and dine me. Fine and dine a customer. Fine and dine me. But apparently it's wine and dine. I'm sorry, I am somewhat of an immigrant, even though I've been here most of my life. But yes, it's wine and dine. Sorry about that. So in today's video, I really wanted to go over some of the comments. There were so many comments on that video, and really good comments that I thought, maybe I should touch on because I missed a lot of really valid points that I think the audience should have the right to know. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is a really good comment that was sent my way in regards to bonds and surety bonds. I did not talk about that at all in my last video. So yes, a freight forwarder, a brokerage, someone who is selling loads does need to have a surety bond or a money in trust, a trust bond. So the comment that came in that, Ronen, I was a little surprised to see that you did not mention the financial security which a freight broker has to maintain in order to be an active freight broker. This would either be a $75,000 freight broker surety bond or $75,000 trust fund. So I want to make a quick comment about this. What do I feel, about these bonds? I feel like, 75,000 is just not enough. If you think to yourself that a load from the east to the west probably costs around $7,000 to $8,000 to transport, really 75 only lasts you about maybe 9 to 11 loads. Now, I could do that in one day. I can sell 9 to 11 loads. So imagine what I could do in a month. Now, $75,000, if I was going to stiff the world, $75,000, I can probably run that, within half a day, and I could probably, if I really wanted to, I could probably damage about a couple of $1 million if I wanted to, okay, to cause damage out there, shut down the company, take this $1 million or $2 million and just run. And we've seen bad players do this in the past. So what do I feel about these surety bonds? I think these surety bonds don't work and they're not enough. I actually feel like people should be posting up the cash. I actually feel like if your brokerage company has X amount of volume, you need to have a surety bond equivalent to the volume that you're doing. So based on your last year's financial statements, that's how much you should be posting up bonds. If you did $10 million, maybe the bond should be, 30% of that, or 1/3 is what you should be posting as a bond. Now, I actually don't believe in bonds. I actually feel like you need to put liquid cash out there. So if you're grossing $100,000 or $200,000 a month, then you should probably have 3 months worth of reserves posted somewhere. A lot of you might not agree with me, but you know what? I'm sick and tired of what's happening with all this double brokered freight. As you see freight brokerages, as they start slowly tumbling down, there are so many unpaid invoices to carriers, and it's causing so much trouble in our industry. So that's my comment about the surety bonds. Okay, so another valid point here, and I'd like to make a comment on this, is I disagree with your number 1 point. Relationships are very key as a carrier service. I would rather pay 1% higher than 1% lower with a relationship that's broken. I want them to cater to me and what I need. So basically it's referring to one of the points that I made was that, relationships are slowly starting to die down. Now, in that video, I talked about personal relationships. I talked about carriers that are whining and dining traffic managers. I talked about personal relationships that people form over the years. I don't know about you guys, but nobody's holding down the same job for more than 3 or 4 years. Everybody's cycling through. 15 years ago, 17 years ago, when I got into this industry, I remember the traffic manager at some manufacturing plants. It was the same guy for 15, 20 years, and he would retire from that position. If the only way you're getting into that door is if you have a relationship with this guy, and then people would either feed him money under the table, or people will take him out, and people will, wine and dine him, baseball tickets and hockey tickets for Americans out there, football tickets, and that's how you kind of bought into a personal relationship. Now, that person would probably feel a little bit uncomfortable to use other carriers if they had that personal relationship with you. And I feel like, over the years, that has significantly died down. I don't know about you guys, but I personally, prefer to text everybody these days. Getting with somebody on the phone is just not the same anymore. You could talk to so many more people when you're emailing and when you're texting versus when you're talking to somebody on the phone. Now, usually, anybody that's 50 or 55 plus, they prefer the old-fashioned way of calling somebody and talking to them and, taking 10, 15 minutes in a conversation and explaining. I feel like the new generation just doesn't have the patience for that anymore. You can see it right across the board. You can see it with the way people are just not holding down jobs. After 2-3 years, people want something new. And I see it here in our office also. You get a 21-year-old that starts at one position. All of a sudden, his 1 year is not finished yet. And all of a sudden, he's trying to apply for other positions within the company. Where before, it's like, you would work 2, 3, 4 years in one position, then upgrade to another position. But people just don't have the patience anymore. All right, next comment. This is a big one. I wasn't aware that the shipper was still responsible for freight charges if the broker doesn't pay. So I actually had between 3 or 4 consultations booked with me from that video just because of this point. So I want you to know, okay, that if any of you are in a situation where your freight bill is not paid, okay, under the Bills of Lading Act, that shipper, that receiver, anybody who's named on that bill of lading is potentially liable to pay your invoice. Okay, so let me just read to you quickly what the Bills of Lading Act says. So the shipper, receiver, consignee, and any holder of a bill of lading and the owner of the goods shall each be jointly, severally liable to the carrier for payment of all freight charges and for the performance of the obligation of each of them under this contract. So, in other words, what does that mean? Anybody that's named on that bill of lading, the shipper, the receiver, the buyer, even if they're different people, they are all liable for your payment if you were actually the carrier. So it can go 10 different chains and 10 different brokers. At the end of the day, if you're that carrier, you're gonna send that bill to that shipper. You just need the right legalities, and that's why people are booking the consultations with me. And it's not just the Bill of Lading Act, it's also the Mercantile Law Amendment Act. So you just need the proper act, you need to send the proper letter, and that's why I'm getting booked for consultations, because I give these documents out for carriers to be able to go after the shippers and the receivers legally. All right, so yes, 100% based on your comment, I want you to know that you, the carrier, if you're not getting paid for that invoice, there are 3 or 4 brokers. I don't care. You need to get paid, and you need to get paid legally. You're allowed to get paid, even if the shipper has to pay a second time. Okay, next comment. If I was a manufacturer and got burnt by one broker where they didn't pay the carrier for the load and I had to pay them again, that carrier would get the rest of my business, that broker and all the brokers would be kicked out to the curb. And I really think that a lot of these manufacturers have realized to deal directly with the carriers, you'll get a better service because now you're dealing directly with one person that is delivering and picking up your load. So I agree with a lot of what you said, and I disagree with some of what you said. So if you got burnt by the broker, so in many cases, when I go after the shipper and I go after receiver, they end up becoming my customer 100%. I can tell myself that it's much better to use an asset-based carrier versus a broker. The difference is that I, as a carrier, specialize in something. Okay, so for example, we specialize in Midwest and Southeast, right? Where the manufacturing plant probably has 50 different destinations. He goes out west, Oregon, Washington, California, places that we might not service. But it is 100% better to be using an asset-based carrier that specializes in something, except that carrier will not be able to cover all of your loads. So you will find yourself 4, 5, 6, 7 different carriers that specialize in different things. For example, if you have LTL, you would use one carrier. If you have full truckloads loads going to the Midwest or Southeast, you would use ET Transport. And if you have, full loads or LTL going out west, you would use other carriers. So this is what I mean by manufacturing plants have become very, very smart over the years, and they are starting to store all these email addresses and all these phone numbers of different carriers that specialize in different things. The one thing that I don't agree with what you said is that when you said the carrier would get the rest of my business. And I think that in all honesty, I as a carrier cannot take on the rest of a manufacturing company's business because I only specialize in certain things. But I do agree with you that, there are multiple carriers that can do this manufacturing plant's work. All right, next comment. Great informative video. You just gave 1 million truck drivers hope again. Well, that's the whole point of this channel, right? To unite for all us, anybody in our industry to be under a platform or, to get some information. There's a lot of information on this channel. And yes, of course, I want to boost the morality of all you truck drivers and everybody in our industry because I feel like it's a great industry. I feel like there's a lot that we can fix within our industry, and maybe this is the way that we're going to do it. Just the last thing before we wrap up. There were so many comments on waiting times, not getting paid. I've done a video on this on, brokers' excuses for not paying carriers. So these reasons are just not acceptable in order to not pay a carrier, and brokers are getting away with this all the time. Now, when you're getting away with things that you're not supposed to be getting away with, that's why FMCSA is starting to talk about getting into the industry and mandating freight brokers to pay carriers for waiting time. This is a huge topic that they are discussing in regards to the FMCSA trying to get involved because there's a ton of waiting time that is not getting paid to carriers and is not getting paid to owner operators or company drivers. Well, company drivers get paid, and if you're working for a bigger fleet, you should be getting paid for your waiting time. It's the carriers that are getting stiffed all the time, and we're not getting paid by freight brokers for waiting time, and that might need to change. I think this would benefit our industry a lot if there is some sort of rule mandating freight brokers to pay waiting time, and it's just sad. But other than that, our industry is amazing. Hopefully you learned something from this video. Make sure you give this video a thumbs up, and please guys, share the information, share it with your friends, with your family, with other truck drivers. Now, thank you all so much for the comments. I love reading the comments, and it gives me motivation to do videos like this where I'd like to respond to a lot of these comments, but I do read them and I try to be as much as I can. I mean, there's thousands of comments that are coming in, but I try to be as responsive as I can to these comments. I'm Ronen, R-O-N-E-N, and I'll catch you in the next video.